What's up, Battletech fans? I'm continuing my cartoon kick by taking on the Hunchback 2C from the Battletech animated series, the personal ride of Star Captain Pytor, because I wanted to expand a little on some of the techniques I used in the last video, and I thought this would be a fun project for the show. I'm also going to do something different this go-around like I did last time, because I want to demonstrate some other color combinations I don't typically explore here. Also, since I'm doing a clanner mech, let's see if I can get through all the steps and avoid using contractions. As usual, all the materials you'll need will be in the video description, so let's get started. So here is where I switch things up on you a bit to start with. Gray Sear Spray is my choice this time, since I want to use a light gray contrast paint in the next step. I still have my trusty can of Duplicolor Sandable White Auto Primer at the ready though, and I plan to use it for the same reason as I have in previous videos. To give the contrast paint that I plan to use something to stick to. Otherwise, what I find is you roll the dice on the contrast paint beading up and running off. So a light dusting of this will help you avoid that fate, and the overall hue of the miniature will remain the same. Not enough to change the color of the undercoat, just a tad so you can avoid some frustration later. Now my plan is to move on to the first base color, and I feel like the light gray look you get from Apothecary White is the best for this. So what I want to do with this is apply it liberally but evenly. However, be careful here, because it can be very easy to overdo it in this application and wind up with pooling in places you would rather it not. If this happens, use your brush to soak up the excess liquid and wick it away from those areas to spread across the rest of the model if you need to. I really like the light gray look for this model, so I highly recommend the Gray Sear undercoat. I always give these about an hour or so to dry, otherwise what you risk is coming back to start the next step and accidentally rubbing off bits of contrast paint that were still wet. Then you have a huge white spot, usually in a highly visible spot on the miniature. Ask me how I know. So I went and watched a couple episodes of Robotech while I waited. Not a bad use of my time. Now I get out Ulthuan Gray for some dry brush action. I want even less coming off the bristles of my brush than I usually do for a dry brushing step, so remember, wipe most of the paint off on a napkin or paper towel before you start this. I like to test it on my fingernail before I put it on the model, but I recommend having some sort of tester handy so you can see how much paint is coming off the brush with each pass. Quick, even strokes are what I like to use, but I only want to apply a very light pressure to these moves. Normally, my dry brushing is meant to add a lot of excess color to the surface of the model, but in this case, I only want to add a faint highlight, because the difference in tones will be noticeable if I apply too much. I only want the hard right angles of the miniature to get this treatment, honestly. I really like the way Apothecary White sits on a model when done right, without excess pooling, so changing the color of that base coat is not really what I have on my mind with this part of the step. Now, to continue on the metallic undercoating technique from the previous video, what I get out for this step is my favorite gunmetal color, Lead Belcher. I want the colors I paint over top of it to have a metallic sheen to them without me having to actually go out and buy a metallic paint or do any extra work after the fact. I want the top colors to go on looking metallic when they dry. I only need a few areas of the model to get this treatment, which is why I wanted to demonstrate a different application of the metallic undercoat treatment that I did on the Bushwhacker. You can use this technique on the entire model, half of that model, or on just the areas you want the colors to appear metallic. For me, I want that for the chest panel, the cannon barrel areas and their housing, and a couple spots on the legs. Less is more. I feel like I can get away with not using Lead Belcher in the holes where the knees are, though, because in the next step, I plan to put a dollop of contrast paint in there, and I would imagine the Lead Belcher would be invisible then. Just take your time here, use a smaller brush, and try not to worry about painting any of the other metallic areas of the model until later. I can get to that after, because then I can clean up easier, and it takes that off my mind while I work. The less I have to think about during detail work steps, the better off I am. Get the escape hatch at the top of the head, too. I start with Warp Lightning here, because if I need to clean up any chest areas that I want to be blue, having done the small amount of green first makes that process much easier. When you get to working the green in around the edges of the cannon housing, just take your time and try to avoid getting any on the white areas. But if you get a little of it in a white paneled space, you can thin it out and remove it by dipping your brush in the water right away and using the bristles to remove the excess shade. Most of this is flat paneling or easily accessible recessed areas, so this part of the process is a snap. Then I get out my Talisar Blue when I come back for all the other bits. If I were you, I would only load up my brush with a small amount of contrast paint and work your way up so you keep from accidentally adding too much. Like I say, I just put a small dollop of contrast paint into the knee holes and just let it pool up. I want these things to have a cartoonish look, and that concentrated puddle of contrast paint in just those two spots will give the perfect feel for me. Give the Talisar Blue about an hour to dry and then do any cleanup you need to do with Lead Belcher before moving on to the next step. The final portion of this step is going over the warp lightning with a coat of Battletech green shade at full strength. This combination of green is the perfect 1-2 punch for some Jade Falcon Emerald, in my opinion. I might have even been able to achieve a similar look with 2 coats of Battletech if I wanted to go that route, but I really just liked the combination of that and warp lightning too much. Now I can go in and tackle all of the areas I want for my final metallics. Now is when I can get to the vent on the chest, the autocannon exhaust, fists, actuators, etc. Whatever you want to do here is what you should do. As I always say, pick your spots and get to work, because there really is no wrong way to do it. I even gave mine a couple of armbands with it, so there really is no limit for you. Do whatever makes you happy here. When the metallic areas have dried, I go in with my standard coating of Nuln Oil at full strength. Just be careful to avoid your white areas. Again, this is one of those times where less is more. Load up the brush with a small amount of this at first and work your way up. Another thing I always say here on the channel is you can always add more, but taking it away is another story entirely. So go slow, pay attention to your moves, and do your best to hit only the spots you want. Use the thinning technique from earlier if you accidentally get some in a white area. And I can finally talk normally again. We're done! I did the cockpit with Retributor armor and Seraphim Sepia shade with Ardcoat for the shine. The base is done with Martian Iron Earth Technical, Griffhound Orange contrast paint, Fugan Orange shade, and dry brushed in Kindle Flame. Other basing effects by Army Painter. If you enjoyed this tutorial, do us a big favor and subscribe. Turn on all notifications so you can find out exactly where Battlebound's gonna turn up next. Have a paint scheme or a legendary mech you want to see painted here on the channel? Drop your suggestions in the comment section below, and maybe you'll see your idea here on the show. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Tuckdavian, and I'll see you next time right here on the Space Lanes.
Be sure to smash our like button and subscribe to our channel.
Crowdfunding is when lots of people give you small amounts of money to help your passion project come to life.